Class is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
So Gerald, do you see my title slide?
Yeah, Spring Quick Bite webinar series.
Yeah. Okay, well, it's 11 o'clock. It's 11 o'clock. Let's get started.
Okay, sounds great.
Yeah. Good morning. Good morning, everyone. This is Dr. Meng Gu. I'm an associate professor, extension specialist, working on ornamental horticulture in the Department of Horticultural Sciences at Texas A&M AgriLife Extension Service. And this is actually our second webinar of this season of our Spring Quick Buy webinar series. Today we have Dr. Jared Barnes. He's an assistant professor from SFASU, and some of our audience may ask me, what is the acronym? It stands for Stephen F. Austin State University in the beautiful town of Nacogdoches, Texas. Dr. Jared Barnes will share some of his perspectives from engaging students and young professionals with our green industry. And you'll notice the picture on the left here. Dr. Jared Barnes always has this signature bow tie when he do a presentation. Unfortunately, we're not gonna see him real time today. We're gonna see his presentations, but this picture kind of gives you a pretty good idea what he looks like. And he was just invited to on a panel. Of course, he could tell you more about it on the panel at Cultivate in Columbus, Ohio, just last week. And our webinar was scheduled for last week, but because of that conflict, we had to schedule this week. So he could probably, and that's great because he could tell you some of the perspectives that he learned from the Cultivate there. So, whenever look for this bow tie guy, young guy, at these green industry events. I will let him to tell you more about himself. I think you'll see some of that in his about his background in his presentation. So we're gonna skip this one. And I just want to remind you that that our webinar, is all the webinars and the previous recordings were all housed here at Green Beyond. That's really Green Vision without the S, greenvision.wordpress.com. And feel free to join our listserv to receive future notification about webinars like this, and whenever the recordings are available, you'll get emails simply from this listserv. So, I forgot to mention one thing. This webinar, I think I'm going to go back to the first slide. This webinar is sponsored by Southern Residential Education Center, Earth Program, Texas A&M AgriLife Extension, Texas Nursery and Landscape Association, and also Hotchkiss Insurance. So with that,
it's big. Yeah. It may have just gotten too heavy.
Hey.
We're good. So
okay,
here's the panel. At this button here, you can open and close the panel, and somewhere here you have a question panel where you could input your questions. And we've already got a question before we even got started. Some of our audience asked whether there will be handouts. I do not have handouts, but the recording of the webinar will be available at this. The recording of this webinar will be available at this blog site. So it's greenbeyond.wordpress.com. So, and then, we're going to hold all the questions. When you're listening to the webinar, feel free to type in all your questions, but we'll answer all the questions at the end of the presentation. So with that, I'm going to change the presenter to Dr. Jared Barnes.
All right. Can you see it, Mamung?
Yes.
Okay, great. Well, thank you for that great introduction. Yeah, it's a shame that we don't have video today because I'm actually wearing a bow tie for this. So, so I guess I'm here in bow tie spirit.
No,
I
hold on,
really
hold on.
appreciate that
Hold
introduction.
on, just for the benefit
And
of the audience, why don't you show your webcam just for 5
yeah,
seconds?
okay, yeah, sure. Let me see how show.
At the top, there is a webcam, so you just click on the webcam.
Okay, maybe that.
Oh, look
Yeah.
at
Hey,
the
look
bow
at that right there.
tie.
Yeah, it's reclaimed wood from New Orleans. So I
Wow.
bought it there one time when we were visiting. Okay, all right. Well, thank you for that great introduction. Today I'm going to be talking about connecting with millennials, a horticultural approach. And since probably a lot of the audience don't know me or haven't met me before, I wanted to share a little bit about my background. I was born and raised in West Tennessee. This is a picture of me. It's not my son. My wife Karen and I just got married recently, so we haven't had any children yet. But this is a picture of me about 5 years old out hoeing corn and tomatoes at our house. And you can see me there in my awesome 80s shorts. They're hoeing that. But I have loved plants since I've been very, very, very young. For me, being outside and enjoying the outdoors and working with plants has always been a great pleasure. And so when I found out that I could actually have a career in that, teaching students and engaging with students, I was thrilled. And so I definitely directed my life course to go towards the direction of becoming a horticulture educator. I did my undergraduate work at the University of Tennessee at Martin. It's a satellite school to Knoxville, and then I did my master's and PhD at NC State in Raleigh, North Carolina. And now I've been here at SFA for, this is going on to be my 5th year. So I'm thrilled to be here, going up for tenure this year. So I'm really excited about having that under my buckle. We take students on various trips, like you see here, the Dallas Arboretum. I'm also the advisor of the Horticulture Club as well, too. This was our meeting this past spring when we had 27 students from all across campus, not just horticulture students or agriculture students, but we had 27 students from all across campus here who, may never pursue a horticulture career, but they love plants and they love growing plants and they love sharing their love of plants as well too. And so some of those things are going to be what I'm going to be talking about today is how do we engage millennials? How do we engage young people with plants, and how do we do that here at our university as well too? One of my favorite quotes is from Aldo Leopold. There's some who can live without wild things, and there are some who cannot. And for me, this is one of the questions we have to ask in the horticulture industry is how do we connect with and how do we encourage and how do we support those people who love these wild things, who love plants, who love nature, and who love the environment, taking care of that. Because that's the type of mentality that I see in a lot of our students. We have students that, support things like no waste. They bring their lunches to school in specially wrapped containers because they don't want to throw anything away. Or they want to support the environment and make it a better place. So one of the things that I've noticed as horticulturists is that we're really, really good with propagating plants. We've figured out we have cultural guidance, we have all red books, we have tons of books on seed sowing and Durer's manual, etc. But one of the things that we've got to figure out better how to do is how do we connect with young people? How do we connect with even old people as well, to people of all ages, and really help them become better gardeners and help them grow more plants? How do we get them so that they are then willing to take chances on plants and really try to share that education and passion with young people? And so I've spoken about this and written about this in different articles throughout the years. And for me here at the university, one of the things that we've really focused on is edibles, of course, and I'm going to talk a little bit more about that today. But our edible garden Sprout, we overhauled the south side of our agriculture building and turned it into an edible garden where we actually grow produce and then students sell it on campus. I tell people that we have students that carry plants all the way from seed to sell. And the reason we did this is because I was at a conference a couple of years ago, and one of the commentators said that, when you look at buildings, like where we teach our horticulture classes, we look at the outsides of them, what you usually see are things like Yukon holly, jasmine, these common 40, 50 plants that are always used in the landscape, and there's really no creativity. So we put this edible garden in, and shortly after we did that, we actually had a student change their major because they saw that this edible garden exists. They saw that, we had this thing. And so that's what I'm trying to do around our building here, our agriculture building here on campus, is try to make it more green, try to really get a lot of different types of plants growing so that we can show people, really try to show people that horticulture exists here in the garden capital of Texas. Now, if you look in our edible garden, you'll see here we kind of have a little grid system set up. And that was one of the first prototype plantings that we did of design plant communities. And design plant communities is another thing that we're experimenting with here at SFA. You may have heard it as the new perennial movement, the Adolf perennial style, matrix planting, intermingling plant blending. It's going by a lot of different terms because I think that people are still figuring out how to do this system well. But the students have installed these plantings. Here you see it after less than one season of growth. We have beautiful asters blooming. That's Rayden's favorite. Salvia madrensis kind of erupting up out of there. And of course, Muhlenbergia, white cloud, providing some drama as well in that planting. So the reason that I'm focused on doing this is because not only do I feel like this is important for the future horticulture, but we're also doing this because it gives students buy-in to horticulture, in that it helps to connect with things that they already feel. That these plantings help to encourage pollinators. They help to provide habitat for pollinators. Usually we end up doing less maintenance in these type of plantings, less weeding. In some cases, we're not going out every year with mulch. And so there's a lot of things with these planting styles that I feel like we can connect with young people in the next generation. So when you're thinking about connecting with people, you really have to think about how do you market something? How do you present something to someone in such a way that they can be engaged with it and they can connect with it and feel like it becomes part of their life story? And for any of you who read much about marketing, one of my favorite people in the marketing world is Seth Godin. And I love reading his blog, his books, webinar series, etc. And Seth makes some really good points about marketing. He says that stuff like this doesn't really work that well. And I agree with him. Who's going to put on a billboard, wife wanted? And I kind of think this is funny because I feel like in a lot of ways, marketing is the same way today. That, when we're trying to attract people, we're trying to, put things in front of them and stuff. And
Hey,
so
Jared.
Seth has a really good point. Yes.
Hold on a second. There seems to be this static noise. Can you make sure that your earplug is plugged in correctly?
Yeah, it's plugged in. Is that better? I can hold it up closer to my mouth.
Much better now. Yes.
Okay. Yeah. Sure. Okay. It was just probably on my shirt, and I'm moving a little bit. So.
Okay.
I'll hold it up.
Thank you.
Okay. So Seth makes this really great point that if we want to connect with people, we need to do 4 things. One is we need to connect with their emotions. That people out there have emotions. They want to be happy. They want to, have beautiful plantings. They want to eat good food. They want to have colorful places to live in, et cetera, et cetera. And so these emotions, every person has them. So we need to connect with them and engage with them on that. The other thing too is that with marketing, one of the things that you're doing with marketing is you're changing the way that people think about things. For example, I think that the pollinator movement, recently pollinators have been in the news. They've gotten a lot of attention from various media outlets. You see it on Pinterest, you see it in gardening magazines, and we have begun to change people's minds about pollinators and what they think. They now recognize that we need to be doing things, and so that's a great example of changing someone's mind about some aspect. The next thing that he says that you need to be able to do with whatever products you're selling, whether it is landscaping or whether it is selling a retail garden center, is earn the permission to alert people to things that are going on. And so if you begin to build relationships with people, you can begin to alert them to things that are going on. That can be a newsletter, that can be Facebook post, whatever. But being able to alert and connect with them one-on-one, permission marketing is really a good philosophy to take on with that. And then last but not least, we need to give them people to share. That, it's funny, when I was at Cultivate, someone brought up the concept that, plants, they're Instagram ready, they're Pinterest ready. We don't have to jazz them up like, you might in a restaurant, if you see food, or, you don't have to paint a house or anything. Plants are already beautiful, so we can share them with people and all different types of organisms. I just put a bunch of emoticons there to sort of get that point across, but, we can share plants and share those things with so many people. And then also having these plant products that we sell and having these beautification of landscapes, gives people something that they're willing to share and talk about. So emotion, change, alert, and sharing, those are the 4 big things that he believes in. And so I'm going to talk a little bit more about the emotion thing today, because to me, emotion is how we really begin to connect with people. So I put a little horticultural flair on this, because for seeds to be able to germinate, like if we have a tree and a seed falls off, that seed has to imbibe things, it has to take things in for that plant to actually be able to start growing. And so the question is what is it that people have to imbibe? What is it that really begins to connect with their emotions that we can engage them with to try to help them connect with plants and connect with this horticultural world? And we see this sowing seeds. Some seeds germinate just like that, but some seeds may have to go through a little bit of some type of experience. And for me, I see the seeds thing every day, because we have students that they've never planted a plant in their entire life. That's some of the students that I'm dealing with. They had never grown a plant or planted a plant in their entire life. And so they get to witness this whole process of sowing a seed, growing it out, and then actually having something to harvest and take home for, Thanksgiving, so they can share with their family. And really what that starts to play on is this process of wonder. That wonder is something that connects us with the outside world. It helps us feel like there's something bigger than us. And that, I feel like plants really offer a lot of that. And I first heard about this concept of wonder and how we needed to connect with people in this book called Contagious. And I'm going to go ahead and put that up there. It's a really great book if you're interested in figuring out how to connect with people's emotions and young people's emotions through marketing and through selling your products. So in this book, Jonah Berger, who wrote the book, he talks about how in 2007, 2008, one of the most passed around articles on the New York Times website was this photograph. And this photograph is a picture of a person sneezing. Ugh, disgusting, right? But you think, like, who in the world would, usually with sneezing, you're sharing germs. And it's like, well, who in the world would share a picture of someone sneezing? But the reason that this picture is so fascinating is because they imaged this using technology that they use to image air coming out of jet engines, like for the military, for example. And part of the reason that they figured out that one of the reasons that this was one of the most shared articles is because of this sense of discovery and learning and wonder, that people like to share things that they learn. Take for a second and just think back to a conversation that you've had in the past 24 hours, 48 hours, etc. I'm willing to bet that a lot of you at some point in time told someone that could have been a spouse, could have been a child, could have been a friend at work, etc. But I'm willing to bet that at some point in time within the past couple of days, you've shared something that you've learned with someone else. And I'm willing to bet that. And so this sense of wonder is all throughout the plant world. We have it available to us. And so one of the things that people need to imbibe to engage with plants is wonder. And I'm willing to bet that at some point in time, you also had this experience of wonder. Maybe it was a cutting that you stuck and it grew, or maybe it was a seed early on that you planted and saw that germinate. One of the great examples I love to teach students about and tell people about is if you're trying to get young kids engaged with seed sowing, have them sow basil seeds. Basil seeds, within 10 minutes of getting wet, they start to form this gelatinous coat on it. It's actually an adaptation that helps the basil seeds stay wet. But within 10 minutes, you sow a seed and you begin to see change. And to me, that's wonderful. And I feel like, we need to show people these things that occur with plants more, because each one of these, it can help to encourage and engage people with this sense of wonder. Okay. The other thing that we need to have people imbibe is a perception of value. The plants are actually valuable, and really connect with people's emotions along that line. So this is a photograph from a story in the Washington Post that was really, really fascinating to me. The guy here who's holding the violin, his name is Joshua Bell. And Joshua Bell is one of the most famous violinists in the entire world. Like, seats sell when he plays for hundreds of dollars. A very, very, very prominent musician. The violin that he's playing is a $3.5 million, yes, you heard me right, $3.5 million Stradivari, crafted in 1713, okay? And the place that he's playing is pretty special because it's Washington, D.C. in rush hour traffic. So you've got one of the most famous violinists ever, you've got one of the most expensive violins ever, and you've got some of the heaviest concentration of people within a 45-minute period. Over 1,000 people passed him by in 45 minutes. So just going to rhetorically ask this, but guess how much money he made? Okay, he had a little hat sitting out there. Guess how much money he made? I'll give you a second to think. All right, he made $32.17. How about that? So again, one of the most famous violinists in the world, most expensive violins in the world, over 1,000 people passed him by in 45 minutes, and he made $32.17. And I think it was from like 30 people. One lady recognized him, and she gave him $20. So, I'm sure she thought that was a real bargain. But I put this up here because, to me, it's fascinating. We look at plants, and we see how valuable they are. How much value they add to our landscapes. There's calculations up there about trees and green infrastructure, how much it costs to purify water, and how much we get value from that. And so I think the other thing that people have to imbibe for their passion of plants to germinate is value and how much they actually are. And this story is great because it shows us that if things are out of context and people don't have any connection with it, that they may not necessarily perceive it to be very valuable. They just think it's another common street musician. They just think it's another common plant, growing along the side of the road. And I think as a horticulture industry too, we're a little bit guilty of this. This is an image that I think some of us see occasionally in different stores and stuff where plants are reduced the value of. And so we have to make sure that as a horticulture industry that we are helping people perceive the value of plants, that actually what they see and what they are getting out of that, we're not actually devaluing that as well too. So we've got to be cautious of that. Of course, there are germination barriers that we can struggle with sometimes. Some people may be like, well, one of the things that we have running into is that plants can sometimes be expensive, or, people can be living in really, really small areas. And I just wanted to show you this. This was me as a graduate student, living on meager 16, 18,000 something dollars a year or something, it's typical stipend that most graduate students get in different universities. But this was my patio out on my out by my apartment, and I lived very small area. I lived very meagerly, but I had plants and I love doing this. And if you follow people on Instagram, they're figuring out different ways to grow plants. Maybe it's with grow lights. Leslie Hallett just put out a great book on how to garden indoors with lights. So we need to figure out ways, if we're going to sell plants, we need to figure out what barriers might exist. So living small, living cheaply, how can we figure out ways to help make sure that we have products to sell that young people can potentially engage with. The great example of this is our students did a fundraiser last semester, and they sold plants in little bitty, the little bitty like 2-inch pots, small pots, succulents, house plants, and students made like over $800 in 1 week selling those. And that was just with selling to students, here on campus. So, we have to figure out ways to help encourage people to grow plants and maybe selling things smaller, and keeping in mind that a lot of people live in small quarters, and how they can grow plants, trying to figure out ways to connect with them. Okay, a great story of this too is that I had succulents growing at my house, or at my apartment, and this actually allowed me to connect with people. The guy who lived up diagonally across from me, he was this punk rock guy. He loved listening to the hockey games and stuff on television. You could always hear him whenever there was a hockey game on, because he'd be like, yeah, you'd hear him screaming. So I walk home one day and he's like, hey man, that plant that you got down there is so cool. What is it? And I told him about Echeveria, and I was like, here, I propagated one if you'd like one. He's like, thanks, man. So I came home a couple of days later, and he was like, this guy has no plants on his patio at all, but here this little plant is sitting on top of a drum, just kind of shining there. He's like, man, this plant's so cool. I got online, looked up information about it and stuff, and he started teaching me things about Echeveria that I didn't know. So, again, having these little plants, that are shareable. We live in a share culture now where people share things and connect with others. So, succulents are shareable. Try to grow some of those and have those for sale. Another thing that I think is really, really interesting is I put this slide in here, the high maintenance and low maintenance. And so I want you to take a second and think about this. That if you think about the most valuable things in your life, like your family, this is my, in the top left corner, my sister, mom, and dad. Photograph we took on vacation several years ago when it snowed in the Smokies. And then this picture down here on the right-hand side is my students, and I love spending time with them and teaching them. And then, of course, down in the left-hand corner is me and my wife, Karen, when we were out in Fredericksburg a couple years ago. But if you take a second and you think about everything that matters to you in your life, these things take time. These things take time to engage with, and that we have to put effort into things that we really care about. And so it kind of cracks me up because everybody wants low maintenance gardening. Low maintenance is this word that's tossed about left and right because people are like, oh, I want low maintenance. I don't want to invest a lot of effort and time into it. And what I think is interesting is that in some ways that may be disconnecting people with gardening, that because they just want this low maintenance, because they're not spending a lot of time with it, they may not be building that connection with it. So to me, I want things to be high maintenance. When our students grow plants and stuff, they're spending a lot of time with it, and they get connected to those plants and they engage with it. So I think we also have to be careful that we're not potentially hurting ourselves by sort of touting this low maintenance type concept gardening. Another thing that I've got in here too about making sure that we're connecting with plants is a lot of times when you see plants for sale, you see facts and figures on them. This plant blooms July to August, gets 6 feet tall, has pink flowers, et cetera, et cetera. We tell a lot of facts. But one of the things that we need to tell more of in horticulture are the stories. This was an article that came out in the Harvard Business Review a couple years ago, written by Ty Montague. He actually wrote a great book on the important role of stories in organizations and how you need to be crafting a story to be able to tell people about your organization. So he had this really interesting point in this article. There was this project called the Significant Objects Project. It's really fascinating. What they did is they took junk. They took like broken mason jars. They took old figurines. They took all this junk and that they had found at yard sales. And they had, they paid like pennies for dollars, mere dollars for a lot of this stuff. And so what they did is they then gave the object to an English writer. They gave it to people who wrote some type of really interesting story behind it. Well, not a long story, but just an interesting story behind that object. So what was really fascinating about this project is that they bought $128 worth of junk. And once they attached these stories to it, they sold this junk on eBay for $3,612. And once I saw this, I was like, man, I need to start going to some yard sales and start writing some really good stories for this stuff. In total, this was an increase of 2,800%. 2,800%. What they did is, they took an object, they associated a story with it, and then they sold it on eBay in an open auction, and they were able to increase the value of this. And what Ty goes on to say is that what this shows us is that people connect with story. think back years and years, hundreds of years ago, story, oral tradition was the way that people shared information with each other, shared morals, shared life wisdom, about what you should eat, what you shouldn't, etc. But, today we a lot of times sell plants just with the facts and figures on a little card, on a little bench card in the greenhouse or in the garden center. And so what I would encourage all of you to do is whatever you do, whatever you sell, whether it be turf grass or whether it be succulents or whether it be houseplants, make sure that you try to search out these stories that plants have behind them. Or, tell a really interesting story about how this plant impacted your life. I'm willing to bet that people are going to connect with these stories more than if we just had the facts and figures behind them. So one of the stories that I love to tell my students, and I think it really hits home the point, is this is of course Linnaeus. Okay, Linnaeus was a very, very famous botanist. He came up with the binomial nomenclature system. He wrote Species Plantarum, which is our first really good classification of plants. And if you're like me, most of the time whenever I heard that stuff in botany class, it just whoosh right over my head. And I'm like, I don't care. Who cares about this? This is just facts and figures. But what I found out was, and here's also this picture of Species Plantarum. Let me show you. Let me open up one of the pages here. And this cool Lilium, Fritillaria, it's like all these plants that we love to grow. But what was so fascinating about Linnaeus was that Linnaeus was like a rock star of his time. When he started teaching at the university, he increased enrollment at the university from 500 students to 1,500 students. And when he and his students went out into the countryside to look for new plants, if they found new plants during their plant walks during the day, they would have a parade back into town, and then that night they would all get together in a pub and they would all have laughing and drinking and stuff. And then Linnaeus, I kid you not, he would get up on a table and he would start doing Polish jigs. Okay, this is we look at this guy and we're like, this guy's so boring. And the other thing too is that I tell students the story when connecting them about binomial nomenclature, because when you have someone young and they see the word Metasequoia glyptostroboides, it can be a little bit overwhelming. But I try to tell him, basically, it's almost like he was trying to come up with lyrics or something to songs, So I tell students, he was the Madonna of Monarda. He was the Brad Pitt of Pittosporum. And he was the Justin Timberlake of timber. So, always try to search out these stories that you can tell people, tell them to become more engaged with plants. And if you want to read more about Linnaeus and the great stuff he did, the book that I got that information from is The Plant Hunters by Tyler Whittle. Okay, so let's talk about connecting with people. This is something that I love that our horticulture club did this past year. They put up flyers all around campus, and they did this because our horticulture club numbers last year got to be quite dismal. At the end of the semester last year, we actually got down to the point where we were down to 4 members. And I was one of the 4. So they went around and hung up these flyers, and you see what it says, plant lovers. That's the type of language that we need to be using with people, engaging with people. If you've heard about it, Seed Your Future is a great movement out there where people are trying to figure out, do research, how to connect young people with plants. And so, we're trying to do the same thing here, is trying to figure out ways to connect students with plants. And so I loved how the students went around and put these flyers out. Very, very simple, and again, using the terminology plant lovers. And actually some of the flyers that they hung up, they said that if new students came, they would actually get a free plant to do. So one of the things that we did here at the university to try to help to connect with people is we redid our website. This is the university-based website that we have. Tells a lot of facts and figures about horticulture, etc. But one of the problems that we ran into this was that if you look at it on a mobile device, this is what it looks like on my phone. Okay, so this is what it looks like on a mobile device, and this is of course about double the size as what you would look at. So what we did is I had the Horticulture Club sponsor and create a brand new website, and the website's called Horticulture is Awesome, and horticultureisawesome.com. So we post on here a lot of the different activities that students are doing. It is mobile friendly. We did it through Squarespace. And I'm telling all of you this because when millennials and young people start looking at your website, it needs to look fresh. It needs to look clean. It needs to also be easily accessible as well too. And that's one of the problems that we saw with our old website, was that it just didn't have this fresh cleanness to it. And it was also not very mobile responsive. And so we created this brand new website. You agree with me, it's probably a whole lot easier to see the text on the right side, and the pictures look very engaging than on the left side. And we have this information on our website too. You just click the little tab up at the top. But again, I share that with you because you go to a lot of these websites and you know, you don't have a lot of the information. And that would be the other thing that I would tell you too, is have a website. Have, if nothing else, have one landing page where you tell your hours or contact information or something. Because I realize Facebook is great and Facebook is free, but if something happens to Facebook, you need to make sure that people have a way of connecting with you. And that's one of the trends we see with millennials is that we love to look stuff up in our phones. You know, I was out shopping yesterday in a store, pulled my phone out, was trying to look up information about what I should be buying in that store. So if you have a website, you know, you don't have to be an expert in SEO. Squarespace, which is the one that we did, but there's also Tumblr. There's a lot of other ones out there. You know, it's like $150 a year is usually what you're spending. And I think that's well worth it to help to make sure that you have a place on the mobile web that people can visit you on. Okay, another thing too that I'd like to tell you to do as we're thinking about how to germinate interest in people is really to pick one of the social media platforms, or a few, and show up regularly. It can be Instagram, it can be Facebook, it can be Snapchat, whatever you want. And if you don't know how to do it, then talk to a young person on your team and ask them how to help you set that up. But if you're out there constantly engaging with people and you're posting pictures of your product, etc., you know, it can really help to engage. Mung Mung was talking about how I was on a panel at Cultivate, and after the panel I had someone come up and talk to me about how they really appreciated what we talked about with trying to engage young people with plants. And one of the things that they said is that, you know, they lived in a college town, very rarely had college students come in, but there was a young girl who came in one day and took some pictures of the succulents in their store and bought a couple, and then she left, but she posted those images online, and within the next couple of days she had more college students, you know, coming into their greenhouse and nursery and garden center. So maybe not only posting it yourself, but maybe encouraging people to take pictures inside your greenhouses and garden centers, maybe having social media ready areas that people can actually engage with, can help you generate traffic into your garden center, or help to share your design concepts, etc. Okay, the other concept that I want to talk about, again, playing a little horticultural riff here on things, but to me, you know, grafting is a really fascinating concept in the horticulture world, where basically what you do is you take one part of one plant and put it onto a part of a different plant. Usually we do this for some benefit, right? We don't know what the rootstock is, so we graft a cultivar on top of that, and boom, you know, we've got a predictable plant that we know what's going to happen. But what we're ultimately doing is we're bringing two different plant parts together in a very artful and skillful way and combining them into one. And with horticulture, where I see, you know, this concept of grafting is where we can bring different concepts together and really have them become one composite thing, so that we can try to engage and connect more people with plants so we can be more productive. So this is an article that was written a couple of years ago in Greenhouse Grower by my friend Katie Kettleson, and she called she called grafting a mega mashup. And so what she did is she had plants, food trucks, and brewing company, and also like rustic junk type things. They all came together and they sold this really, really cool stuff. So they had 3 different businesses come together, work together to sell products. And so Katie said, I've long preached about how we need to go to the people, meet them on their turf, so to speak. We can't expect Gen X or the millennials, or heck, even my parents, to walk into our garden centers on a whimsy. And frankly, why would you want to be so passive? So when I'm talking about grafting, basically you can graft tons of different things in the horticulture. You know, you can connect disparate areas and figure out a way to plantify, to create a word, you know, to really green that up and engage it with plants. One of the things that's very, very clear is health. A lot of young people are interested in the health aspects of plants and trying to live healthier lifestyles. So I think we need to promote more gardening, you know, garden yoga. You know, can you host garden yoga at your design firm? Or could you host it in a garden center, you know, something like that, where you're getting people to come out and do exercising. The other thing too is, you know, we live in a society where, you know, people can put on fox outfits and sing songs about what does the fox say. Sorry if I've got that song stuck in your head for the rest of the day. We also live in a society where people go and dump buckets of water on their heads. So we can't forget that plants are fun. And if you have design firms, you know, turf grass, retail greenhouses, you know, whatever, you know, you can figure out ways to have fun with it. You know, plants are fun. We love growing plants and we love sharing that with people, but we can't forget that, you know, with all the science and business to it, we've got to have a little bit of fun in there as well too. House plants, you know, living at home, living at work. A lot of people are now wanting to spruce up and make their living spaces more engaged. And so we're seeing the houseplant market rise. That was actually a lot of discussion at Cultivate about how millennials are now going through this houseplant phase. Somewhat similar to the 70s, but a little bit different from that as well too, because, you know, it's a different generation, it's a new group of people. But they're definitely liking to grow these houseplants. I heard stories from garden center owners who said, you know, our houseplant section never really moved anything, but because of the new boom, we moved it up front closer to the entrance of the garden center or greenhouse, and they started selling a lot of hotcakes. So figuring out ways to help people who live and work at home, help them have plants in with them. My friend Jason Reeves posted this a couple of years ago on Facebook, and I asked him for the picture. When we see this, you know, we're just like, oh, this is horrible. You know, how dare they? You know, we almost feel like, you know, someone has spray painted our children and sent them home, you know, after, you know, school or something. It's like, how dare you? But I look at this and I'm like, you know, maybe this is a way to connect with plants, because, you know, yes, it's planted, yeah, it may live, may not, but hopefully it'll grow out and actually become something that people will engage with. And Angela Palmer actually wrote a piece on this a couple of years ago too, and she was talking about how also that, you know, we don't need to be so hard on this, that, you know, we never know what is going to connect someone with plants and with the world of horticulture. And so maybe painted succulents aren't the worst idea in the world. Yes, I know they look hideous. Yes, I know it feels like, you know, our souls are crushing on the inside, but we never know if a painted succulent is going to lead to a prairie garden, or we never know if it's going to lead to, you know, backyard container gardening. So we just need to make sure that we're not being too harsh when people go that route. The other thing too that I want to say is that not all grafts will take. So, you know, we in the propagation world, we call that graft incompatibility. So if you try something that doesn't work, don't feel like you're a failure. Try again. You know, there's a lot of interest out there in hosting like craft brewing workshops or fairy gardening workshops. You know, so try different things and see what fits together well. Some final thoughts for the webinar today. Again, going back to story, one of the stories I wanted to share with you is, this is Edmund. And Edmund was a really, really famous slave because Edmund figured out how to pollinate vanilla. But the story is that vanilla, whenever it was discovered, they moved it from Mexico and planted it in Europe in greenhouses, and they started moving it to other plantations as well, like Reunion, which is where he lived. And so they started planting it out. But the problem with vanilla was that it didn't have its pollinator. So it didn't have a pollinator there, and no one could figure out how to get it to set seed, because it was very, very popular. People wanted vanilla, and they were planting it like crazy. They just couldn't figure out how to get it to produce seed. So Edmund was out walking one day with his master, and they came across a vanilla plant that had produced seed. And, you know, the master was like, oh my goodness, this is the most incredible thing ever. And Edmund said, I did that. And he was like, no, you know, I don't believe you. And so Edmund did it again, and the plant pollinated, it produced seed again. And so Edmund was the guy who found out that you could pollinate vanilla. He figured out how the process to do that. No one else could, but this guy did. The thing is that Edmund was 12 years old when he did it. And I share that with you because, you know, we need to do everything that we can to encourage and connect with this next generation of young people. I think that we're really starting to do it with school gardens. I really think we're starting to do it with the like Seed Your Future. They're doing great work as well too. And I also think we're doing it because, you know, children now are really interested in the environment, and plants give them a connection to that. But we've got to figure out ways to propagate more horticulturists and really propagate this passion that we have for plants. Just a quick plug. If you're interested in reading some more things that I've written and stuff, you can check out my website, meristemhorticulture.com. And if you're interested in our program, of course, I've already thrown it up there, so I won't again, but you can go to our website on our program, horticultureisawesome.com. And with that, I'll wrap it up, Mung Mung. So I think we've got some questions coming in potentially.